you remember that kid? Do you remember like that video has gone around so many times? That is Duffy Strodes, I believe. He was a child preacher and went on to Oprah and was featured on TV actually quite a bit. And we're going to talk about children preachers. And the reason why I want to talk about this is not because, I just want to make fun of someone or something like that. I want to show you guys something. This is a personal story for me because I wasn't quite like that. All right. But this is me. This is me at 12 years old, preaching. This was one of my first sermons. And you might look at that and go like, "Oh, that's cute, Dean. That's so cute." But I want to talk a little bit about how this moment actually really messed me up in several different ways. And before we do that, though, I do want to take a look at this kid, this Duffy Strode character. And I do say character because it kind of seems like, he was putting on a show for people. And so let's go over here and we're going to look at some of these clips. They're a little cringy, okay? It's actually pretty cringy. But we're going to talk about like whether this is okay or not. Should kids be allowed to preach? And you might go like, "Why? Well, why shouldn't they?" I'll share my opinion here in a minute.
People want to know what that means that you just said. In your own word, tell us, what does that mean?
It means just what it says. Well,
I've never read the Bible, let's pretend, and I don't understand that type of language. Tell me how that applies in my own life.
Well, why I'm screaming is the Bible definition of preaching is Isaiah 58:1. It says, "Cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet." Yeah, I know what it means, but I just can't.
Please let him speak. Yes.
His dad sitting right there. Dressed
I know
like
what
the
it means,
exact
but it's
same.
just hard to understand. But you got to realize that the prophets were out there saying, "Thus saith the Lord," and they didn't even know who it was. They didn't understand what they were saying.
Like, I just feel so bad when I watch these clips. Like, people look at it and go like, "Oh, that's cringy." But for me, like, I can't help but look at that and see this kid, to see myself in that. Like, I wasn't going, I'm going to show you another clip, what this family did. But I wasn't going on the street, and I wasn't screaming, and I wasn't, going around saying, like, everyone is on their way to hell, and, like, fire and brimstone, like, full independent fundamental Baptists, really saying, like, everything as loud as possible, as bold as possible. That wasn't me. I was in a pretty thoughtful church. They were IFB, but they also had some Reform leanings, and I've shared a bunch about that here on my channel. But this was, we preached the Bible verse by verse. We cared about theology. I cared about theology at a young age. And so at the age of 12, I felt the Lord calling me into ministry, and through the preaching of the word. I remember there was an evangelist who came and preached about Romans 10 and the whole deal of how can they believe in him of whom they have not heard? How can they hear without someone preaching? And I felt like the Lord was telling me that this is what you need to do. This is what you are called to do, to go and to preach. And my church affirmed that and then gave me opportunities to preach. And most of that was through my school. I went to a conservative Christian school. But part of that, and this is where it gets like really bad, and some of the stuff that really messed me up, was I was in preaching competitions. So I wasn't just going and preaching. I was preparing a sermon for a long period of time, and then I would compete against other kids my age in preaching, of course, boys, because, but yeah, so there's a lot there. But when I look at this kid and he doesn't know what he's saying, this guy right here, this kid, he had no idea what he was saying. He would have given you all the right answers. He would have told you exactly, like, this is why I'm talking about it. I was sincere, okay? But I didn't know what I was doing. And when I look at stuff like this kid, it just kind of breaks my heart. Like that he was manipulated. And for me, like, that really speaks to me as well, because in a way I was too. So let's go over here. I want to show you just a little bit more of this kid's story, because he's gone around. Like, I saw him going around Twitter the other day, and this kind of, like, I've been thinking about, like, the title, really, Confessions of a Cringy Teenage Preacher Boy. I've thought about that title for a long time, and so I wanted to talk about it, and then I saw, oh, well, he's going around. Let me discuss it a little bit. But let's go over here, and I want to show you just a little bit more about this story, and I'll show why it's important here in a minute.
The children left the public school 4 years ago. Their home has been their classroom. Their mother is their teacher, and their curriculum is strongly Christian-based. It's the only way, the Strodes believe, that the children will get a proper education. This is not a family especially concerned with education, social convention, or public acceptance. They are fanatics, the father explains, fanatics for salvation.
L-O-R-D, that's what Jesus shed for me, the blood, the blood, the blood, the blood, the blood.
Like, what they're saying, obviously, isn't wrong. Like, at least in this part, you know, that this is what Jesus did for me. That's a wonderful thought. But, I mean, they're all dressed the same. There are different videos out there that you could look up about this family, the Strode family. But the dad is a street preacher and sounds just like the son does, just screeching and hollering. And they're dressed like the exact same. They're putting their Bible to their mouth as if that's going to really help carry their voice. It's not going to, not really. But they all do that to go and to preach. And what this is indoctrination. And this is something that we need to be so careful about as Christians, especially, you know, parents, Christian parents. We need to be very careful about with our children, is that we're not isolating them. And that's what happened with this kid. He started preaching at his school, and you can see all kinds of videos of his principal trying to be kind and gracious and just be like, son, you can believe that, but you got to stop yelling and you got to get into class. And, you know, they had the news cameras all over the place, and he just wasn't having it. This kid wasn't going in. He was going to preach. And so, yeah, he got kicked out of school and then homeschooled and then isolated within this family. And all of a sudden, he looks exactly like his dad. He's sounding exactly like his dad. Is this really what we want as Christian parents? Like, I think it's a good thing to want your kid, obviously, to believe in Jesus. That's what I want for my kids. But to force them into this kind of lifestyle where they're isolated, they don't even go to school. You know, I know that there are a lot of Christians who homeschool, but you probably, at least you should, give them opportunities to be around different kinds of people. You know, it's not like you just throw them into the deep end and say, hey, deal with every different ideology, 8-year-old. But you're letting them gradually think for themselves. And this kind of environment, that's not what this is about. And this whole idea of child preachers, I think, is really trying to get into that, like, whole isolating, the whole, you know, you should just be a good Christian. And what that means is fill in the blank of whatever my soapbox is, whatever I think is the best thing. And so for Dustin Strodes, the dad, or David Strode, he says it's street preaching. And so his family goes all into that. But this brings up the question, like, is it, like, obviously I don't think it's wise. I don't think it's wise for a kid to be preaching like that. And I'll get into my story a little bit more. But is it biblical or not? Is it wrong? Well, I think that the Bible is actually clear, and a lot of Christians don't think about this, is that not everyone should preach. Now, in a certain way, yes. because we have the Great Commission. And the Great Commission says in the Gospel of Mark to go and preach the gospel to every living creature. So in that way, yes, everyone should preach. So that should include children, children who genuinely believe in Jesus. And I don't think that, you have to be 14 years old in order to get saved. I think that there are tons of people who get saved at the age of 5, age of 6, maybe even times that they can't even piece everything together, but they've always believed in Jesus. That's genuine. But, those people, yeah, they should go and preach. But when we're talking about this kind of thing, of going and actually like giving full-on sermons, whether you're on the street or inside the local church, I think that's where a lot of Christians get a little bit too flippant about what they allow. And so anyone can go and preach. But the Bible actually talks about those who preach in a direct connection to those who are qualified to be elders in a local church. And there are qualifications. I've talked about that a whole lot on my channel, with different stories of celebrity pastors and all of that kind of stuff. We talk about the qualifications quite a bit. One of them is that you shouldn't be a novice. In other words, you shouldn't be immature. And, a lot of people take that and say, all right, well, a new Christian, like a brand spanking new Christian. And I think that's definitely part of it. But I think part of it also is just being an immature person. And a child is pretty immature. This Duffy Strode character is very immature. This guy right here was very immature. And I don't think it was right, actually, looking back. I've gone back and forth over my time. There was a period, because I started preaching when I was 12, and I started doing these competitions, and everyone, especially my family, was like pushing me like, oh, this is great, this is your thing, this is what the Lord wants for you, so go and pursue it. But also, this makes us look better as a family. It seemed that way. I felt that pressure, at least. I'm getting really personal on this, but I felt that. So I wanted to do it, and so I did it. Kept on doing it. Won. I don't want to brag about it because I'm not all that proud of it, but I won first place every year in our regional competition, and then I went to internationals and preached in front of hundreds of people. And, I placed there too. I won trophies. I remember one year I won a Palm Pilot, which was a big deal at the time. But it's silly to talk about it in that way, preaching competitions. But this was also, this was part of accelerated Christian education. If you know what that is, you know what that's like. But, they also did like soul winning competitions. So it kind of tells you, what they were about. But I got a thrill from it, and it made me look good to other people. And I do genuinely believe that I had a sincerity. I wanted to preach the gospel. I wanted to teach people the Bible, and I was studying the Bible like crazy. I was reading John MacArthur books and Chuck Swindoll books when I was 12 years old. Like I was going deep for a little guy. But all that set aside, I was still a novice. Like, this guy didn't know what he was talking about. He hadn't experienced life. And so I don't think that it's an appropriate thing to have, a kid, whether he's 12 years old or like Duffy seemed like he was probably like 8 years old, 7 or 8. Like, I don't think it's appropriate to have child preachers. That's not to say like, hey, you don't want to like talk people down of, you got a kid who's excited about Jesus, and maybe he genuinely does feel like this drawing from the Lord of, this is what you're supposed to go and do. Don't, try to persuade them out of that, but also be a little bit more careful. Ask hard questions. Ask them why they're doing this, because I can tell you that this moment, it wrecked me later on. Because I had to go through so much in my first years of ministry. I remember sitting, because, I did this my whole junior high school years, This, I think, was my last year. This was my senior year. And, so I kept on doing this. And it wasn't really until my first year of pastoral ministry where I remember sitting in my office, or maybe not the first, it was probably like second or third, but I was sitting in my office and looking out the window, and I just was thinking, like, did I ever have a chance of not being this? Of not doing this? I was going through a difficult season of ministry. Church was going through things, and it was just hard. And so I was just sitting there going, like, was there ever, like, could I have been a mailman? And I've kind of shared this part of the story before, of like watching the mailman go and take his stuff and, deliver the mail. I'm just watching him, and probably he was just like, what a creep, just watching me. But I was just like, could I have been a mailman? Like, did I ever have a chance of doing anything else? Because I felt like this pressure from my family, from my church, to go and pursue this thing. And once I got started, it felt like this avalanche. I remember, actually, there was one year where I didn't do it. My junior year, I decided I'm not going to. And I actually lied to my pastor because he was asking me why I didn't want to preach. And I told him that I was dealing with some sin, knowing that that would be, an excuse that would be appropriate, and I didn't want to say what it was. But I was like, yeah, I'm just dealing with some sin, and, I just don't think I'm in the right place to be preaching. And that was a complete lie. That lie was a sin, but I just didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it anymore. I felt all this pressure, like I had to perform, that I had to win first place, that I had to, be, good preacher boy Dean. And I was just done with it. And so I took that year off, and the next year, I did it again because I felt like, all right, it is for me. But that was something that I wrestled with for years, of wondering whether, that it was ever my decision to go and do it, or if it was just, pressure from other people or expectations that I was like, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And that's the kind of thing that we can do to our kids, is that we can create like these barriers. If we isolate them, if we're not careful about their faith, whether we push them too far into different ministries at a young age, we can kind of put them on this trajectory where later on they're going to have all kinds of questions about whether their faith was ever genuine, whether it was something that God did in their heart, or if it was pushed on them by someone else. And so I think we need to be very careful about the faith of little ones, even teenagers, and don't put too many restrictions on them of, hey, here's what we expect of you in your Christian life. I mean, like, there should be expectations. There should be things as parents that we're trying to see growth in them, like we would for any other Christian. We want to see that in our kids, but we need to be very careful about the influence that we have over them, and make sure that we're giving them opportunities both to succeed and to fail, and not coming in and just being like, well, you didn't win first place at internationals, Dean. I remember that conversation. But like, don't do that. But, give them opportunities both to succeed and to fail, and just be careful. Not everything that a kid does on a stage at a church is super cute. And even if it is, be careful about that, because that moment might stick with them, and they might have questions about that moment later on. So can children be preachers? I don't think so. And that's coming from one. So I don't know if that answers everything about children preachers, but I am going to redirect this into an afterlive where we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea of child preachers. I'll take any of your questions. You could ask me what my texts were and things like that, talk about preaching as a kid. If you want to hear more about my theological journey and you're watching the replay, you could click over here. There's a video where I talk a lot about my Reformed theology and where that came from, and get into a little bit of my past as well. So just some thoughts for you. I'll see you over in the afterlife, or maybe in the next video.